recording? Okay. So I don't have a lot of notes for this particular section, but I want you guys to take notes, so go ahead and break out your pen and your paper and all that good stuff. If you want to type your notes, of course, that is fine. Just have them ready to show me by the end of the day. All right, so the project overview. Today we are going to look at particles. Particles used for a variety of effects, such as smoke, bullets, explosions, and more. Particles are a good way to create thousands of a single object if you need, like sand. You don't want to have to model and animate each piece of sand individually. That would be ridiculous and very, very time consuming. The particle systems in 3ds Max are separated into two main categories, event-driven and non-event-driven emitters. We will begin with non-event driven emitters as well as deflectors and adding forces to our particle systems, and then we will look at event driven particle flow systems. I don't have a ton of experience with the event driven stuff, but I did a couple of tutorials over the past, 4 or 5 days or so. I'm going to show you one of them, and then we'll walk through that, and then you can explore that on your own a little bit. As long as you can work the non-event driven emitters, I'm a happy guy. Okay, you guys are at the beginning of this road for 3ds Max. Got a long ways to go yet, so don't worry about it if you don't get everything. And again, same as last week, you're going to record yourself doing this. Guys, most of you are doing real good at hitting the 3 minutes. I'm going to ding you for 3 minutes and 30 seconds though. It's a 3-minute elevator ride. That's how long you have. 2 minutes, 59 seconds is beautiful. Cut it off at 2 minutes, 59 seconds. Okay, so we're going to start off with what are called the non-event drivens. Now these are simple emitters. That being said, we should not dismiss them. Sometimes simple is best, and sometimes the more advanced stuff is just more tool than you really need. So I'm going to kill some of these lights so you can actually see just a tiny bit better. Please don't sleep. I'm going to go ahead and there we go. Now we can see a little better. And I still show up pretty well on camera, so rock and roll. All right. Is everybody ready? Aye, Captain. Aye, Captain. Come on, I know you all watch SpongeBob. All right. So when we create our emitters, they're going to be, we're going to go to create, and then for some reason it's under geometry. I'm lying. I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to go to create, and then we are going to go down to, why did I do this to myself? I was right the first time. Geez, I hate it when I second guess myself. Go to create under geometry, and then the drop down where it says, normally it says standard primitives, I want you to select particle systems. Particle systems come in a variety of flavors. We're going to look at some of the simpler ones first, such as snow and blizzard, and probably spray or super spray, one of those two. And then we're going to look at what is called the PF source. The PF source is a tool that allows us to create very complex particle systems. But I think it's important that you understand the basic idea of how the particle system works. So let's start with blizzard. Because snow and blizzard are basically the same thing. Blizzard just gives you a few more options. Same with spray and super spray. But we start by clicking on blizzard, and then we're just going to click and drag and to create the emitter. We'll right click and go ahead and bring that up a little bit. Now you might see one little particle. As I scrub my playhead down the line, we will see that we have more particles. And before we get too far, let's go ahead and just set this to 300 frames. So we have our 10 seconds. And if I scrub my playhead, we'll see that we have some pretty simple particles falling, and they only fall for a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to jump over to our modify panel, and we're going to start looking at some of the options that we have for the blizzard. Now this is pretty straightforward. Number one, we have display icon. How big is the actual icon? I'm working in generic units, so I got 140 by 144. I want to go ahead and save this and set up my project folder. Should have done that first. So let's go ahead and say I'm reusing an old one, so I'm just going to save it. So we'll do save as. 3. All right. That's just in case the machine decides to shut down in the middle of working today. I was rendering some last night and my machine overheated and shut down. Haven't had that happen in a while, so I think it's time for a new computer. But let's go through these options. Now, of course, we start off with, like I said, display icon. It's 140 by 144. I'm going to go ahead and just make that 150 by 150. And then make sure it is sitting at 0 for no particular reason. But next, we have viewport display. This is how my particles are going to be displayed in my viewport. Now, obviously, if I have, say, 10 million grains of sand in a scene, I don't want to show all 10 million grains of sand in my viewport. So you'll notice where it says percentage of particles 10. So I'm only seeing 10% of the particles that will be generated in this scene. I can show them as dots or ticks or meshes. Now here in a minute I'm going to show us how we can make it rain teapots. And then we'll display that as a mesh. So basic parameters. I already did that one. My apologies. Particle generation. That's where I'm at it. Because of my resolution, I can't show very much at a time. That kind of drives me a little nuts. Okay, so number one, particle quantity. How many particles are we going to create? The use rate, 10. That is going to create 10 new particles for every tick of the frame. If I say use total, now it will create 100 particles for however long I've told it to create particles for. And we're going to get down to that here in just a minute. The particle motion. How does the particle move? Number one, it's got a speed of 10 units as it leaves the emitter. Anytime we see the word variation, so if I were to say 50% variation, 50% of them would move slightly faster, 50% of them would move slightly slower than, or 50% would move slightly faster or slower than the 10, the speed. I don't really mess with tumble rate, but that's going to be how it rotates as it falls. Particle timing. This is an important piece right here. You want to pay special attention to the particle timing. The emit start and the emit stop. If I scrub my playhead back and forth, we'll see that after we get to frame 40 or frame 30, no more particles. That's because I've told Max to stop emitting particles at 30 frames. If I want to do it the entire time, I'm going to do 0 to 300. Now, what if I want it to be snowing at frame 0? I don't want it to start snowing at frame 0. I want it to be snowing at frame 0. What's one way that I can do that?
Negative something?
A negative number, absolutely. So I could say you start at negative 100. Okay, now I need to go back up here and change my use rate because I left it on use total, and I've got 100 particles for 400 frames. That's not very many particles. I'm going to go ahead and go back to use 10 per. So now as I scrub my playhead, we'll see that at frame 0, I've already got snow falling. So don't forget that. If you need it to be going ahead and snowing, at the beginning, set it for a negative number. Now we also have this display until. Okay, even though I'm emitting particles all the way to 300, after I get to frame 100, my particles disappear. That is because I have display until set to 100. If I say 300, now my particles will stay the entire time. Particle size, this is pretty self-explanatory. But again, this is 1 unit, so my particles are approximately 1 inch. Variation, a little variation. Some will be bigger, some will be smaller. Now by default, when the particle leaves the emitter, it takes 10 frames to get to full size. That's where it says grow for 10. When it dies, towards the end of its life, it shrinks for the last 10 frames. You can turn those on or off if you like. Under particle type, this is where it gets to be fun. Now, we're just going to look at the standard particles for right now, but they also have metaparticles, and then we'll also look at instance geometry. But metaparticles behave a little differently, and I don't think I would do a very good job of explaining them. So we're just going to focus on standard particles and instance particles, instance geometry. That being said, some of the standard particles I can use are triangles, or specials, or constants, or 6-point. I can make cubes. So if I select a cube, I can come up here to where it says basic parameters, and I can say go ahead and show that as a mesh. So now instead of little dots, I get little tiny cubes that show up in my viewport. One of the most common types of particles that you will find in a game or in just about anything is called a facing particle. Now, a facing particle generally faces the camera. So like if you see smoke in a video game, regardless of where you're standing around that smoke, it's going to look the same because it always faces you. And smoke is almost always particles. Does that make sense? For now, we're going to play with cubes. And so if I make them a little bigger, let's say 5 units. Let's say I want to do something a little different though. So let's look at instanced geometry. Let's go up to my create panel. Let's go over here to standard primitives and make a teapot. Just anywhere in your scene is fine. Let's select our emitter. Go back to my modify panel. Change from standard particles to instance geometry. I'm going to scroll down here. It's going to say instancing parameters. Pick an object. Pick my teapot. Ooh, oh, them teapots are huge. So let's go up here and make those teapots a little smaller. Let's even do 1. Okay. Now it's raining teapots. Notice how they start off small and then they grow to full size. That's because of that grow for. I'm going to leave those as teapots for now. Rotation and collision. This will control the rotation of our teapots and our particles. Notice how they rotate as they fall. Interparticle collisions. I would be very careful with this, because if you enable interparticle collisions and your particles will hit each other, that is a ginormous amount of calculations to be making. If your particles don't need to hit each other, don't make them hit each other. Okay. Object inheritance motion. If the emitter is moving, do the particles follow it, basically. Particle spawn. We need to set up a few things before we get to the actual particle spawn. We'll look at that here in just a minute. And one nice thing about this is if I go down to the very bottom, you'll notice that it says load save presets. So there are a few presets that you could load up and then kind of deconstruct to see how they made it rain or they did their snowfall. Does that make sense? Okay. So this works pretty well, except for the fact that my teapots fall far below the ground. And if this was, an animation, I would be wasting processor by drawing and animating all of those teapots that fall beyond the view. Now there's several different ways that we can do this, that we can fix this problem. Number one is to add a deflector. We could slow the particles down so they don't fall as fast, therefore they don't fall as far. We could make them not live as long. That would be two other ways that we could do this as well. So if I come in here and I want to go to my particle generation, life. I don't think I touched on that one. Where it says life, that's how long the particle lives for. So if I don't want them to go as far, one way I could do it would be to set my particles for 15. Now they don't fall quite as far. And they only live for X amount of time. Or, if I want them to live for 30, I could come in and I could cut my speed in half. So when they leave the emitter, they're moving slower. All of that's going to give you different effects. The way you learn this is you get in here and you tinker with each of these settings. What happens if I do this? Oops, that broke that. Don't do that again. Okay, simple. But a really effective way to do this is to put in a ground plane. So I am going to start off by creating just a simple ground plane. I'm going to zero that out. Once I've got that ground plane created, I'm going to jump over to the space warps, and that's the 3 lines. So it's create and then space warps. Now underneath space warps we have a lot of different forces and deflectors. We're going to look at a couple of little basic ones. First off, deflectors. My favorite deflector is the U deflector, and that's universal deflector. So I create this object, I'm going to select the geometry that's going to act as the deflector, and that's as simple as that's it. That's all I have to do. So there's my deflector itself. I jump over to my modify panel, object-based deflector, pick item. I'm going to go ahead and grab that plane 001. And now I need to take this deflector and tie it to this emitter. Now I'm going to do that using my bind tools. Okay, we have our select and link, we have our unlink, and then we have this one which we've never used, which is bind to space warp. If I did that properly, yeah. So now my teapots, you will notice, they don't go beyond my deflector. They actually hit my deflector and bounce back up. Let's go ahead and make sure we have our deflector selected. And then we can look at some of the options for that deflector. So again, we have the amount of bounce, which if we set that to 0, now they won't bounce. They'll just kind of hit it and stay there. Fade away. Again, we have variation, so if I set that bounce to 1 and I set the variation to 50%, some of them will bounce very high, some of them will not bounce hardly high at all. Anytime we see that word variation or noise or chaos, here's another one. Let's set the chaos to about 75%, and that's just going to make them bounce in interesting ways. But let's say I don't want them to bounce at all, and I don't want them to stay there. I just want them to die when they touch that thing. So let's go back to our emitter. Gonna have to go down to the blizzard part, okay, because we put that deflector on there. You'll notice it just basically added a modifier to the blizzard emitter. So you go down to the blizzard level, and that gives you the blizzard options. That is killing me. Killing me here, Smalls. Oh, this resolution. Anyway, I can make it work. If I go all the way down here to particle spawn, I have some different options. I could say die on collision. So as they touch the plane, notice how they just disappear from existence at that point. I could say, and oh, I might crash the machine. I could say spawn on collision, which means when they hit the emitter, they're going to spawn even more particles. Please don't ever turn on spawn trails. Not a good thing. Your machine will go.
Oh, your fault.
Yeah.
Blow up like a dinosaur?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's lagging.
Yeah. Okay. So again, here's some more chaos features. Okay. You can add a little chaos to the speed. How fast do they bounce off? You could also scale, so you could change the scale on them as well. No idea what object mutation Q does, but it sounds really cool, doesn't it? All right. So we've made it snow teapots. We've learned how to hopefully kill our particles when they're no longer needed. So I'm going to go ahead and do die after collision. If I jump back over to the space warps, there are other space warps that you could use, other deflectors. The universal deflector is nice and simple and does what I want it to do 95% of the time. But I would definitely recommend exploration and, experimentation, as always. Now, one of the last things I'm going to show you with this particular emitter, and I'll probably show it to you again with the super spray, is what is called a force or forces. Now, certain forces affect particles and certain forces affect what are called mass effects objects. Okay, so I went to forces, which is the space warps, 3 lines, and then from the drop down select forces. Now these are things like vortex and gravity. Okay, now we have gravity by default, but if I want, I can add my own gravity. I can add wind to it. We're going to do, I like the vortex. It's good for demonstration purposes. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw the vortex. One thing that I really like about this particular set of tools is they tell you exactly what it's good for. So vortex, and this is really hard to see because of my resolution, but you guys are sharp, you'll figure it out. It says support objects of type, and then if I click on that, it's going to tell me particle systems or mass effects systems or both. So make sure that you're paying attention and that you listen to what Max has to say to you. So let's go ahead and tie this force to our emitter. And we're going to do that same way we did before, bind to space warp, drag from the emitter to the warp. Now I'm going to grab the emitter a little bit. And notice as I move it, okay. So if I scrub my playhead now, we will see that they come over here. And are now affected by that space warp. And notice that they're not dying because they're not actually hitting my deflector. So let's go ahead and change that. There we go. Because the last thing you want is a lot of particles that are not going to be seen. All that does is suck up memory, take render time, things like that. You don't want that. Now to add a material to this, you would add it just like you would any other material. You would just create the material and apply it to the emitter. I'm not even sure what render engine I am in. Probably by default it's going to be Scanline. Let's go ahead and go to Art, why not? Physical, where you at, physical? We have a nice physical material. I just want to make sure that this is right before I move on. So, good. So now I have nice shiny red teapots. Okay. If you are using the Art engine, I just want to remind you a really simple, good light to use. It's just that sun positioner. Super easy to set up. Creates a skybox for you. And depending on your render settings, you can kick out your renders pretty quickly. I say that, and now it just kind of sits here. But okay, got it. Hope it didn't crash. But it is a really nice render, and doesn't take that long. I've noticed that 1280 by 720, while it doesn't look quite as good as 1920, it is still very passable. And that renders very fast. So, but that's up to you guys. You can use whichever engines you want. Now, we'll tell you if you're going to make it snow, like with a cutout of a snowflake, you're gonna have to really finagle things to make your cutout work properly. And the 10 years I've been doing it, I've always had issues with it. Sometimes I just smack it around until it works, and then other times I just cannot get it to work at all. So think about that. Okay. So that would be the Blizzard. Okay, now we're going to look at one more, just so that we get a little more practice with these basic emitters. I'm going to move my sun out of the way. And we're going to look at what's called the super spray. So I'm going to go back to my Create panel, Geometry, Particle Systems, and Super Spray. Super Spray is a good one if you want to create like a spray of water or something along those lines. I know that sounds kind of redundant since it's called spray, but it's pretty good emitter for that. It's also good for like if you had, say, an artillery weapon that was firing. This would be an excellent one to fire your projectiles with. You could make your projectiles out of geometry and fire them out of the super spray. So again, I want you to, this time I'm going to let you guys be a little more self-driven. Kind of check out the particle generation on things. See how many particles you're generating. And explore those. Just kind of see where you can get to. If you get a little stuck, don't worry about it. Just kind of ask me. that's really hard to see. Oh, look at that. Okay, maybe not quite that small, huh? Okay, that's a little better. Okay. Something that you should look at would be the particle formation under super spray for the axis. So I can change the axis in which it is going to go. I can also change the spread. And so again, this would be really good for creating, say, a water fountain or something along those lines where water would go shooting up at random stages. And once you've got some particles coming out, probably shooting straight up in the air at this point. Remember, you could rotate your particle generator if you needed to. So you could shoot them off at an angle. So something like this. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that up just a little bit. Once you've done that though, and you get some particles being generated, let's go ahead and create a force. So either gravity or wind or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and just go with gravity so that they go up and come back down. I'm going to go ahead and create a gravity. Grab my bind to space warp. And now when I scrub my playhead, okay. So I want them to go a little farther than that. So there's a couple things I could do. I could come in, I could play with the gravity level if I wanted to, but a little better one would be to come in here and just increase the speed at which my particles leave the emitter. Maybe that's too much. Yeah, that's a little better. You can do multiples as well. You are not limited to just a single force. So you could apply gravity and completely forgot what it's called, vortex or wind or whatever. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another deflector so that when my particles come back down and hit the ground, I might have them bounce and create even more particles just to see what that looks like. So again, I can come back here to standard primitives, go to my plane. Doesn't have to be a plane, but plane works best for me. Going to set up my forces. In this case, it's a deflector. Wrong deflector. I want the U deflector. Go ahead and select my plane. And then last but not least, tie my emitter to the deflector. And so now they bounce off, which is kind of nice. I'm going to go back down to my super spray level, and way down here under particle spawns, let's go ahead and say die after collision, spawn on death, and each one of those spawns 5 new ones, which that might be a mistake. Okay. So now I could do some pretty cool stuff with this if you think about it. I want you all to approach it from your own way. I want you all to just kind of, you know, do your unique things that you have been doing so far this semester and keep it up. And we'll give you a few more minutes to play with that, and then we're going to build something really cool using the particle flow, which I would say is relatively new, but after doing some research, it actually, I think they put it in like 2014, which was, my God, like 6 years ago. Can you believe that? What were you doing when you were in 2014? Most of you were probably, what, about 14?
Eating Cheetos and playing Halo.
Playing Halo?
Probably.
Going to school, maybe? Taking your thermometer and holding it up to the light. I'm sick, Mom. My God, your fever's 127. But these are two of the basic particle engines. Now we kind of understand how particles work on a basic level. Okay, we have an emitter. We have to tell it when to create particles, how to create particles, what they should look like, all of this type of stuff. And this does it in a very simple way. Now, we didn't really look at the other ones. If we come back over here to particle systems, P-Cloud and P-Array. Particle cloud is if you need to fill a volume full of particles, it will restrict it to that volume. I would mess up any type of demonstration I tried to do with it, just because it's not one that I ever use, hardly. I need to get more into playing with the different particle systems. But I have included for you, of course, I have included for you links to all of the particle help files. So feel by all means, you know, dig into these things, read them. If nothing else, I want you to know that when you get out there in the real world, you can teach yourself this stuff. Between YouTube and the help files and Vimeo and all the other things that are out there, you can learn anything you want. Udemy is a great place. Their stuff is super cheap. Udemy, it's a website, and their stuff is usually really, really cheap. I probably spelled that wrong. Yeah, that one. It's Udemy, not Udemy. But you can get a set of 15 different video tutorials for $10 from these guys. Okay, now they'll say something like, the regular price is $350. It's kind of like shopping at Kohl's. Okay, that shirt was never 75 bucks. They say it was, but if you paid 75 bucks for that shirt, you're an idiot. Because Kohl's will sell it to you for 20. But this is a great place. I bought quite a few stuff from them. And then there's this other one that I really like as well, which of course I cannot remember the name of it. There we go. The school pays for an account for me. Now this one's considerably more expensive. This one runs about 50 bucks a month. The other one with Udemy, I like it because it's a pay for what you want kind of thing. I want these tutorials, $10, they're yours forever. And they cover all kinds of stuff on Udemy. It's not just this, you know, digital stuff. It's all kinds of stuff. And I don't know if you guys have noticed the commercials on YouTube for all the master classes you can take now from people, you know. deadmau5 has one.
Yeah.
On how to write EDM, right? I like deadmau5. I just don't think that'd be a very good course, honestly. I mean, just because you're really good at something doesn't mean you're really good at teaching people how to do it. You know? But so there's all kinds of places to learn. You're here. I'm going to give you a good foundation. Am I going to teach you everything you need to know? There's no way. I just can't do it. You wouldn't remember it anyway. Okay, so got any questions about this so far? Particles. Okay, do you guys want to take a quick break? You want to keep going? Quick break it is. Okay, so this is what we're going to learn how to do. This is really way simpler than it looks. And like I said, there's a really great YouTube video where the guy does a great job. So let's jump back to Max. Now I have went ahead and I've opened a brand new document that I was working on last couple of days, and the reason for that was because I don't want anything else in the way. So if I was you, I would go ahead and maybe Control N to create a new document. Okay. Now our pieces are pretty simple. I have a sphere, a teapot, and an emitter. That's basically all I've got. But I've got a special kind of emitter, which is a lot different than the ones that we've used before. So I want you to press 6 on your keyboard. 6 is going to bring up your particle view. It might take it a minute. You're getting an error. What's it say? Error creating particle view. Why don't you jump on a different machine? 6. Let's find out. So what I did was I just manually created one. And yeah, unfortunately, it is not going to let you do that. Is anybody else getting an error when they press the 6 key? Okay. Jacqueline is getting a weird error and I don't know how to fix it. Here. So it's a PF source, and I'm just going to go ahead and create one, and then we can hit particle view, and there it is. So now we can actually, we're going to start fresh. If you just want to follow along, I appreciate it. I mean, you can try a different machine, but well, you'll get the same thing out of it. So, okay. So now, this may look familiar to some of you. It may look an awful lot like what you do in Substance Designer. It's a node-based creation system. Now, if you don't see this little toolbox at the bottom, like I have with all these words, I want you to go to the very bottom until your cursor changes, and then you can drag upwards. Right. Another way to do it as well is you might go to display and make sure that the depot is turned on. That is what that is called, the depot. It holds tools. I have no idea what 80% of these things do. I'm not even going to lie. But I know enough that hopefully I can walk you through this. Now, each one of these is an event. This is what we mean by an event-driven particle emitter. It starts off with a simple render, and so that is going to just be an empty flow. So I'm going to actually move this out of the way because it likes to create it at 0 when you do it this way. Yes. Mel brought these down. Asked if I would get those. No.
Oh, sweet.
Not sure exactly what they are, but
Okay.
he said something about 1 copy for me. So.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what they are?
Yeah, I'll have to take a look to make sure, but yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yep. Are you Sean today?
Huh?
Oh, shoot, this is Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah. My best day, I'm not Sean Rhodes. Okay. We have this other friend, his name is Shiva. And I don't know if you guys know, but Shiva is the name of a Hindu god. Great guy. You could toss him out the window and he would land on his feet. Just falls ass backwards through life. Drives me nuts. Okay, I'm really nervous, that's why I'm talking. Because I'm going to screw this up, I know I am. But I'm going to try it anyway, so what the hell. Okay, so we're going to begin by creating a empty flow. So down in the depot, find where it says empty flow and bring one of those out. Now I'm going to try to work kind of half and half so you guys can see what I'm doing. Now when I've created that, you notice I get this little icon right here. That's my flow. All right. If I were to scrub this, we're probably not going to see much of anything. Now if I click on where it says render 003, which is the name of the flow that I've created, PF source 003, I'm going to get some basic options, such as we've already kind of explored, like what type of is it? It's going to be a geometry, how much are visible, and so on. Okay, that's a, okay. So next, we are going to come down here and we are going to bring in a birth. If when we kill particles, we call it death, what is birth?
Like,
The creation of the particles, right? So we have different birth things. We have birth grids, we have birth groups, and so on. I'm going to go ahead and create a birth grid. And I'm going to wire these two things together. So just drag from one wire the output to the input of the next one. It won't let you plug it in the wrong place. So if it doesn't function right, don't worry about it. You just have to plug it in the right place. So I'm going to select the birth grid here, and I'm also going to go find it over here. This should have been, it would have been easier if I had done this in an empty document. Birth grid 002. So, kind of hard to select that in the window. So get used to using your Scene Explorer. The emit time, I'm going to leave that for 0. That way it just emits right at the beginning. I'm going to cheat and jump over to my other grid just to see what my options or my settings were. Okay. So back to the first birth grid. And all I'm going to increase here is the icon size to 50 by 50 by 50. And I know I did 500, so we're going to change that. Okay. So when I created this event 006, birth grid number 2, one of the options here is the display. Let's go ahead and click where it says display 006 ticks. And let's change that from ticks to geometry. That way it's going to show the little cubes. Okay. So now what I'm going to do, if we look at this option over here, I'm going to hide my teapot real quick. So hide selection. I have this sphere. And when my particles are first created, they apply themselves basically to the surface of that sphere. So I'm going to do that next. I'm going to jump over to my geometry and create my sphere. And then just put everything at 0. Maybe raise it up a little bit. Now, how do I tell the birth grid where to put the particles? Well, I'm going to do that with what is called is that right? Oh, I hate this. I'm getting there, hang on. Aha, okay, I know what I need to do. Okay. So, back to my birth grid. Luckily, there's a video you guys get to watch of this. So, back to my birth grid. Number one, I'm going to say restrict by mesh volume. And then, of course, I'm going to, what piece of geometry do I want to reference? Well, I want them to restrict themselves to this sphere. So I can say, click on that, and then I can just click on the sphere. Now these are still showing as ticks, so we're going to fix that. And we're going to fix that by adding a shape operator. So back down to my depot. And I just have to find the right one. I know it's here. There it is. Shape. Just says shape, it's blue. It's in the blue category. And I'm going to bring that up here and I'm going to drop it into my event right after the birth grid. That makes sense?
Where did you find blue?
It's in the middle section. And it just says shape. So something you can do is go ahead and drag this up a little bit, and that way you've got.
Sorry. How did you restrict it last year again?
What? Restricted to the sphere. Let's bring this back up.
Classic was what I originally played. Yeah, when I saw the
So under birth grid, restrict by mesh. And then here we go H, so it's going to bring up.
So I had to restart my computer. And then it won't work. I was like, it doesn't take very like It's fantastic. That's our way to call it. You don't move.
Hang on a sec. You may just have to go back. I'm not sure if I can troubleshoot. No, the shape should go right after grid. So grab shape.
Yeah, people
Drop it.
like that.
Birth grid and then restrict by mesh.
I said that to just.
Sorry. Well, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Like I said, you guys can go back and watch the 20-minute video after I get done. I just want you all to try to work through it, and I want to try teaching it. So, because next semester I'm going to have to do it without any fuck-ups. Okay, yeah, good luck, right? Okay. Now, yeah, I'm sure I can. Now, this works pretty good as far as I have now attached all of those little cubes to the shape of my sphere. The reason this is called event driven is because now I want it to do something different. So I'm going to add an event. There are lots of different tests for events. You can do data tests, you can do collision tests, you can do all kinds of stuff. You can tell by how old a particle is with an age test. And again, if you Google these things, the help files, once you get past the fact that they're kind of hard to read, are very helpful. So I'm going to take my age test, I'm going to drag it up here and I'm going to put it right after my shape. Okay. I could make it free floating, I can make it its own event, but I don't really want to. Oops. Oh, come on. Are you kidding me? Won't let me undo it. I get to build it again.
You can't reverse it on?
I can't control Z, it won't let me.
Oh.
Oh, it brought back one of them, maybe it will. But no, it won't let me, it won't bring back that one. Yeah, such is life. This is what I get for doing stuff live. All right, so again, this birth grid. So let's do this again. So if yours broke, by all means, feel free to restart and work right along there with me. So we're going to bring in the birth grid. Inside the birth grid, I'm going to apply the shape operator, which is down here by the S's, John. Shape, and I'm going to drop that in underneath birth grid. And while I'm here, before I change any of my settings, I'm going to go ahead and do an age test as well, since I'm down here. Let's try not to delete this one. So birth grid, first things first. I need to tell it to create a bigger birth grid. So birth grid 002 is now selected. And like I said, you can try to select it from the viewport, but it's going to get very difficult. Get used to using your Scene Explorer. I want to go ahead and make my grid larger. So I'm going to say, and you can even make it bigger, so we'll make it 100 by 100, why not? Now back to the particle view. Lots of stuff here, but we're going to say restrict by mesh volume. And then I'm going to select, so where it says none, if I press H, that's going to bring up my select by name, which I have too much stuff in there to do that, so I'm just going to select it in the viewport. Now sometimes things don't update quite as fast as you think, and this would update a lot faster if I would go ahead and wire those two things together. So it's easy to forget things. Make sure that the PF source is wired to the birth event. I'm going to go ahead and set this for cubes, 10 by 10, and then you have to change where it says display as well. This gets kind of tedious because every time you make an event, it's going to add a new display operator, and every time it adds a new display operator, you have to change it from ticks to geometry. And so this is roughly what you should see. These are all my little cubes. I could make them smaller if I wanted to, so I could go up to shape and change the size, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to happen is, at a certain age, I want these guys to let go of the surface of this sphere. And so I'm going to go ahead and go to age test. Now, this is just like we did before. And when we were testing the age, or we were setting the age of something, well, when these particles reach the age of 30 with a variation of 5, so 25 or 35, they will move on to the next event. The next event is called random walk. I like this one, it's crazy. So I'm going to go find random walk. Again, it's going to be in the blue. That's why I have my cheat sheet sitting there next to me. And I'm going to find R for random walk. And I'm going to bring this out. Before I wire all this together, though, I think I will go ahead and add the other things that I need here, which are going to be, again, the shape operator. You'd think as a teacher I would know my alphabet a little better. Okay, so shape. Now we're going to do an age test again as well. So now let's go ahead and wire this together. Under the shape, it's going to be set for cubes. I'm going to go ahead and make them 5 units again. And then again, since there is a new display operator, I'm going to have to change that from ticks to geometry. So this is what happens at up until frame 30. And now you'll notice that they start doing the random walk. And wow, that is a lot of particles. I need to bring that down. So let's go render, visible, let's say 25%. And that's another one I have to do for every single display option. Is bring that down because that's just really starting to make my machine lag. I don't know if that will help or not, but yeah, it helped a little bit. All right, so the last thing is to make them go to the new object. So let's go ahead and create, you can make a teapot if you want. I'm simply going to make a cube for ease of use. So again, let's set up our test here. When do we move to the next event? Well, we did that one at 30 plus 5, so let's make this event 60 plus 5. Now we have a really cool feature here called Find Target. And so I'm going to bring one of those out now. Find Target event. So when our particles reach the age of 60, they are going to go to the Find Target. Let's go ahead and select our target. By default, there isn't one. But again, it's super easy. Just come down here and say target. Let's go mesh objects. Add that one right there. So that's my target. If I scrub my playhead, we can watch, and then they're going to random walk, and then they're going to go flying over there. And again, of course, they went to ticks because that's what they're being told to display as. So let's go ahead and set that back up to geometry. Oh, for sure. Okay. Now there's one little problem. They're just kind of flying right past it, right? It's not really what I want. I want them to stop. And so we have a stop operator, which is right here. I just saw it. I know I did.
Stop gradually?
No, it's just stop all by itself.
Oh.
So it may be a different one. Hang on.
In the blue.
That's what I'm thinking. Spin stop. Perfect. Perfect. And then we're going to wire that in there. So what this basically says now is when you find the target, when you touch a polygon on the target, you will stop moving, period. Again, let's change from ticks to geometry. And boom. Yeah. Not bad for only having done it 3 times. So let's watch our particles now. So let's go back to 1. Okay. So you can control the speed, and you can do this with anything, any object. Let's say I've decided that I don't really want a cube. What I'd rather have, we'll just go ahead and, I'm going to get rid of the target first, because when I delete this, it's going to kind of freak out a little bit probably, and just say delete it. So I'm going to say remove. But let's say that I have done my name. So So you could use text or text plus, either one for this, I think. Haven't really gotten into text plus too much. Text does what I want. Let's go ahead and rotate. Make sure my snapping is on. Make sure I spelled my name right. That's always the worst, right? Misspelling your own name. And then, of course, we're just gonna slap a quick shell onto here. Go ahead and make some three-dimensional text. And so now, instead of using the cube, I'm just going to add this object right there. Oops, wrong object. Let's go ahead and remove that. There we go. And so now, what should happen is it's going to make my name. Now, the cool thing, check this out, okay? This is what's cool about this. I mean, other than, you know, everything it's doing. If we go in and we're going to select first off our sphere. Okay, so sphere number 2. I'm going to right click and go to my object properties. And I'm going to untick renderable. So the sphere is not going to be renderable. And neither is my name. So neither one of those will appear in the final render. So what's going to happen, and I may go ahead and render this out, why not? But we're just going to pick a spot right here in the middle. And if I did a quick render, make sure we're just doing single. Of course, I would want to add, you know, some textures and whatnot to it. But this will go from, and that one's going to look kind of neat. I'm excited. That will go down and it will spell out my entire name. The really powerful thing about doing it this way, using the particle flow builder, emitter, whatever you want to call it, is once you build the system, you can go back in and change out the variables, like I just did. I went from a sphere to a cube. I could very easily go from 3ds Max text to my name text. That would make a cool intro. Have a ball roll in, have it all of a sudden cube up, and then become 3ds Max, and then switch around and become your name. I think I have a new weekend project. Okay, I did a horrible job showing you how to do that. I really did. I apologize. The gentleman in the links does a much better job. Okay. But again, this is one of those things that as an instructor, I'm supposed to know how to do everything. And this is a pretty advanced thing. There are people that this is all they do as far as visual effects artists go. See, I realized when I was at GDC, there's a difference between a visual effects artist and an animator. Right? Animators, I think all visual effects artists are animators at heart, but not all animators are visual effects artists. I was exposed to a program called Houdini out there. Houdini's great. Houdini functions a lot like this. You have a lot of different nodes that you plug into one another. But once you build the system, it's a simple matter of going in and changing the variables to get the desired result that you want. So I would really like to see you guys try your hand at this, all right, for your homework. Now you can, if you are not comfortable with this and you're like, man, that's way beyond what I want to be able to do, make it snow, make it rain, make, particles shoot out of the end of a ray gun. I've had students do all kinds of stuff. So, I'm gonna let this render. I'm gonna play with this a little bit more and texture it, all that good stuff, but maybe put in some better lights. That is a lot of particles. I would not want to animate all of those pieces. That would be insane. All right, so for the homework now, build something with particles. You guys did a good job last week. Okay, a few of you need to build up your scenes a little more. Put something in the background. Think about what you're seeing. You're creating a movie scene, basically. That's what I want you to approach this as. So we don't want to leave boom mics, or, you know, if it's supposed to take place in the Old West, let's not have a 7-Eleven in the scene. Things like that. You're creating a scene that is designed hopefully to fool people. I would spend some time playing with the non-event driven. Okay, so the simple ones, just so you get a little idea of how they work. Plus, sometimes that's the tool you need. You don't always need the big fancy and hopefully slightly intimidating particle view. Another thing that I do want to show you is the preset flow. If I drag a preset flow out, that's going to give me all kinds of pre-built particle systems. And again, you wouldn't want to turn this in and say, hey, look what I made, okay, because I'm pretty sharp. But it's a great place to start if you have no idea, like, well, how would I make fire? Or how would I make dark clouds on the distance, or whatever it is, you know, arrows and targets and, you know, all kinds of things that you may not have any idea where to begin. You can take one of these, look at it, and deconstruct it. Go, okay, I see what they did there. And it's a good way to learn, like, what these different operators do. This is intimidating. This is one of the reasons I'm not very good at this. It's because I am super intimidated by this right here. Not even gonna lie. But doing this one over the last couple of days, 3-4 days, however long I worked on it, I got a much better feel for how things work. And so that's why you guys are getting it. Questions, comments, concerns, or issues? Going once? Going twice? Okay. Yes?
It's just a personal thing. I can't get it to conform to sphere.
Okay. Wait a moment. If not, you guys can take a quick break if you need to. Otherwise, I would like to see you work for at least the next hour or so. That does include talking to your neighbor a little bit, as long as you were talking about Max. I'm excited for Capstone. I can't wait to see what you guys produce. But for 3 hours, you guys are mine. All right. If you don't have any questions or anything, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.